Hello, everyone, and welcome to our CSR Marketplace Live session this afternoon. We are glad that you all are joining us for Data to Stories of Impact on Employee, Business, and Community with our partners Give Pulse. We're going to give everybody an opportunity to get into our Zoom room before we get started, but we are glad that you all are here with us this afternoon. Welcome, everyone. As you are joining, why don't you head over to the chat and go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us where you're joining from this afternoon. My name is Erica Bader, and I am joining you from sunny Orlando, Florida today. So go ahead and migrate over to the chat and tell us who you are and where you're joining from. I see some familiar faces who've been on some of our other sessions today. Welcome back to those of you that are joining again. We are glad that you are here. We're going to give everybody just a minute to hop in. George, our presenter, can see where everybody's joining from, so that's good. Thanks for joining today. And all right, good to see everyone. Thank you all for being here. So we're going to go ahead and jump in. We are right at time. Again, thank you for joining the CSR Marketplace Live. This is our Data to Stories of Impact on Employee, Business, and Community session. Many of you have been with us already today, but our CSR Marketplace Live is part of our pre-conference events for our annual conference that we are presenting in conjunction with our partners in the CSR field. And we appreciate Give Pulse being one of those partners and being here to present today and for their support of ACCP. We will be using Zoom today. You guys are so familiar. I know some of you have been on it already today, but just a reminder for those who are joining us for the first time, we do have the live transcript turned on. So if you would like to view the full transcript, you can migrate down to that caret at the bottom of your screen and turn on the transcript. You can also hide the subtitles. If those subtitles are distracting, you can choose which of those settings works best for you. We will be using the chat. You guys are already in it. I see a fellow Orlandoan. Hi, Stasia. Go ahead and use that chat to connect with each other, to continue the conversation, to share your thoughts about what George is presenting today. We encourage you to engage with each other in that way. Just make sure that you use all panelists and attendees. That way everyone can see what you're sharing with the group. We are going to leave some time for questions at the end of the session, so we're going to use the Q&A box for that. Feel free to migrate to the Q&A box and enter a question at any time. We'll take them at the end, but you can feel free to enter them throughout the session. We are using the upvote feature, so if you see a question that also interests you, you can click that thumbs up. And that helps me sort of prioritize the questions when we get to the end if we don't have time for all of them. A recording of today's session, along with the transcript and other supporting materials, will be sent to you. So know that you are getting that information as follow-up, and be on the lookout for it next week. So you will be getting that from us. So with that, I will say thank you again for being here as part of our pre-conference events. I want to remind everyone that conference is taking place in December. We hope to see you back December 7th through 9th with us virtually. And with that, I'm going to introduce our speaker today, who is George Luke, the founder of Give Pulse. And George, we're glad to have you today and looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you so much, Erica. Let me do the screen share mode. 1 second here. All right. And hopefully everyone sees my screen. Cool. Thank you, Erica, for the introduction. Thank you, everyone, for giving me the opportunity to connect with you virtually. And I just want to wish everyone a happy Wednesday, or happy Yay Wednesday, and hoping that everyone is staying safe and healthy. My name is George Luke, CEO and co-founder of Give Pulse, an Austin, Texas-based technology platform with deep roots in organizing and scaling community engagement, volunteerism, giving, and philanthropy. We work with businesses like Lifetime to Bass Pro, all the way to JB Hunt International Paper, to scaling engagement efforts with higher ed institutions like Brown University, UTexas, Hookham, as well as the University of Georgia Bulldogs, which is #1 in football right now, which I was really surprised, and I'm totally supportive of a competitor like Georgia Bulldogs. But I'm really excited to spend the brief time that I have with you all here talking about data to stories of impact on employee, business, and community. But before I jump in, I want to spend the time I have with you all to do a land acknowledgement. just in terms of my personal experience, in terms of all the different various conferences and presentations, I've grown to an understanding and learning that we should use the opportunity, especially when you're traveling, to really reflect and determine where you're at. And I hope that you guys appreciate this land acknowledgement. And since I'm Michigan traveling, so this is actually not my home. I live this looks like Colonial Williamsburg, but this is actually the president's house at a institution that I'm collaborating with. But I really want to use the time to respectfully acknowledge that I'm on the land occupied by the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary stewards of the land. And it's specifically the land of the three fires: Ojibwe, Odawa, Potawatomi, indigenous nations of the Great Lakes region, also known as Anishinaabe, or original people, and their language is Anishinaabe-Mowen. In offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm indigenous sovereignty, history, and experiences. And with that said, for those that were able to connect with us last year, our team was able to have a conversation with our partners from Genentech and Roche to really talk about adjusting CSR for virtual volunteering during the age of COVID. For those that missed out somehow last year, everything pretty much went to a halt from a volunteer engagement, and everything pivoted to a virtual standpoint. So if you guys are interested, there's this access to the right with a QR code that you can access the recording of our presentation with Sherilyn Cabral, who oversees employee giving and volunteering at Genentech. You also notice that throughout this presentation, I have a series of these QR codes, just like the one to the right. Most of them are to the same resource, but there are some that I might call out to specific, unique access links. So those that are unfamiliar with these QR codes, you can use your phone's camera to detect the code. And if that doesn't work, don't hesitate. You could contact me directly at george@givepulse.com. Now on to the topic at hand, with data to stories of impact on employee, business, and community. I'll briefly share about GivePulse, and with the time allotted, I'll obviously share stories of how the work has really diversified with the clientele that we have worked with, and how it has moved the needle in terms of the impact on employee, business, and community. The agenda itself is going to first start off with an introduction in terms of really the founding story of GivePulse and our community connections to the different various partners that we work with. And it really will set up the foundation for having this conversation, so that way you guys can better have a stronger perspective and framework for really doing your work at your business and corporation. So since the earliest days, my co-founder and I on the left, James and I, got the opportunity to meet Randy, the founder of Keep Boston Fed. And for those that aren't familiar with food insecurity, it turns out that there's a third of all food that is currently thrown away. Most of this food is coming from restaurants, events, conferences, in-person conferences. So for those that are in virtual conferences, probably there's not much food except perhaps food that that's potentially thrown away in your kitchen. But a lot of this food is also going to the trash. So how do we actually divert it so that way we can save the food and actually send it to those that are in need of the food? And it turns out 1 in 6 people are actually food insecure. So I think there's an opportunity where you could actually mobilize volunteers to pick up the food and really deliver the food to those that need. At the time, Keep Boston Fed, Randy was telling us how there's one person that really managed 16 volunteers, and they had to really manage them via the memory of their mind, with phone numbers and calling. And I can only imagine that, their brain capacity can only remember so many numbers. Nowadays with smartphone devices, I don't even remember my own number. But in order for Randy to be really impactful in his community, he had to come up with a way to convince 2 engineers, in this case, James and I, to really develop the technology to really mobilize volunteers and also provide the tools to track the pounds of food recovered and where the food is actually being delivered. So that way, his organization can really tell the story that's being captured with all the food that's being recovered and delivered. 9 years later, now as a formal business, helping organizations like Keep Boston Fed, their business partners have really scaled, and now they're feeding hundreds of food insecure individuals in the city of Austin. I think their last metric and report that they put out, they're actually saving millions of food every year. And so that equates into potentially thousands of meals, right? So it's amazing how this one small organization, completely volunteer driven, was able to actually do this with two hackers back in the day. And because of this, we were very fortunate to be White House champions of change. And to this day, James and I still to this day do food runs. Now, this other story to the right is actually an interesting story. As an employee of Vrbo, so those that aren't familiar with vacation rentals, Vrbo is a child company of Expedia. They used to be formerly HomeAway. So part of leadership was really to encourage volunteer time off. So the leadership essentially decided that 8 volunteer hours are going to be given throughout the year for employees to volunteer based on their passions and their interests. The idea was really to improve community relations, build great neighbors, mobilize employees to be a strong voice, and serve into the community. There's actually this side story where because vacation rentals to some communities can be detrimental, a lot of homeowners in the certain area next to a vacation rental really didn't want like parties and fraternities to take up this one house and like have parties nonstop. And so HomeAway decided to really build stronger community relations with all their homeowners. And I think part of this volunteer time off was one of the instruments necessary to really change the image of what HomeAway and vacation rentals can do for a community. And what's interesting though is because of this volunteer time off policy, many of us had the opportunity to volunteer on our own time. And also because of the companies encouraging us, it really helped amplify that engagement even further. For those that are interested in terms of learning this whole full story, you can go to givepulse.com/about, but there's also this QR code that really sums up this one brief story that I'm about to share, which is 30 minutes plus $30 equals college education. Now, you might stop there and think, like, how does that even make sense? But the story goes like this. A computer lab in central Austin, Texas, so those that aren't familiar with Austin, were separated by I-35. I-35, pretty much everything on the east side is being gentrified as we speak. But a lot of the resources are actually in the central side of things. So there's one computer lab in central Austin, Texas, and apparently it has a lot of new computers, new internet, new everything. But the computer lab has really broken down internet, like as in the internet goes to the building, but then for some reason it's not disseminating out to the computers. And so there's this one volunteer opportunity where the coordinator is really asking for volunteers to help fix this computer lab. And I saw this opportunity and I tried convincing all my friends and my coworkers, and unfortunately none of them were able to help out. So I kind of sucked it up and I decided to go and volunteer. Lo and behold, it turns out that a quick restart on the computers would solve a lot of things. It definitely made the computers go faster, but it didn't really solve the internet issue. For some reason, I narrowed it down and it turns out I had to buy a new router. So I went to Walmart, bought a router, came back and replaced it. And as with most volunteers, sometimes you just kind of forget about it and just kind of move on. But what happened was Teresa, who happens to be the lab administrator, she reaches out, contacts me, and she says, "George, I just wanted to remind you and thank you so much from the bottom of our hearts and also from our organization, how much of an impact you made. Because that one donation for the router helped not only to fix the internet, but then your time to install it helped enable the students that are using this computer lab to apply to college." So in most instances, I didn't really put the dots together. I didn't really realize the impact this organization had. But it turns out that 30 minutes of my time plus a $30 donation for the router could really equal college education, because that would help alleviate all the pain points and bottlenecks that the clients of that one lab would have. And this ultimately gave me an adrenaline rush, because I felt like, wow, like as a computer scientist, as an engineer for this company, I didn't realize that my time and effort and donation could go such a long way, especially when the coordinator actually reaches out to me and tells me about it, right? My immediate thinking was like, oh, I should just buy a ton of routers and start donating these routers to a whole bunch of organizations. And that was actually probably the biggest mistake, because when I realized it, all these nonprofits were pretty much responding back and saying, George, one, we appreciate your router, but we actually don't have these issues with the internet. But we do have this issue. We need somebody to develop a website. We need a mentor. We need all of these different various needs. And that was one of the first big learning opportunities for me to realize that instead of doing for people, I really should be doing with people, really working with community partners to understand what their needs are. So that way I could be a better collaborator, a better partner, and really to address some of the biggest needs of the community. So stories like this happen every day. And every day, employees are making a positive difference for businesses and in their communities. And I think part of it is folks are constantly applying their skills to make a positive impact on a person's life. But sometimes, we're unable to capture this information. We're unable to really tell succinctly these stories. So that way it could actually encourage others to do the same thing. And I think the most important piece is, how do we do with and not do for, right? So how do we deeply have those conversations and listen to community partners to really support them even further? Now, I think a lot of different various organizations engage and focus on various causes and initiatives. I'm going to share a few so that way you could understand how they're thinking about leveraging data and how they're actually making an impact in their region and their specific interests. So for example, I think I'm going to mention the top left here, which is JB Hunt. So JB Hunt is a transportation and logistics company. They're very focused on understanding how their employee engagement efforts are really not only gaining leadership opportunities and gaining leadership skills, but really how can the experiences of these employees when they're gaining these skills somehow feed back to their HR system to inform employee performance, retention, and engagement. How do they also in tandem maximize all the good that they're doing in Northwest Arkansas, so that way they could continue providing new relevant experiences, so that way they can make not only their employees at Northwest Arkansas successful and growing, but then also their truckers who are constantly on the road. Like, how do you provide services and engagement opportunities to make them feel belong in this organization? So some of the things that I'll probably touch back to this very soon is, how do we also make sure that we provide employee resource groups, be it DEI or non-DEI related. So that way, be it truckers or employees, they have the opportunity to be a part of these affinity groups. On the right is Johns Hopkins. In addition to doing amazing COVID tracking research, their mission is to also encourage research, advancement of individual scholars who by their excellence will advance the sciences they pursue and the society where they would dwell. They, during the pandemic, have been critical in training contact tracers and informing the world the status of COVID. And we're honored to play a part in their collaborative efforts, working with the federal, the state, and the city, as well as the businesses, to really have a deeper understanding of how to alleviate the pains and concerns of COVID and beyond. Project Transformation on the bottom left has a goal to serve and build relationships with children and the youth from low-income communities, so they can live in an intentional community and explore a call to ministry and service. During the pandemic, they looked at their data to evolve their programming and in-person mentoring to transition the in-person mentoring to virtual mentoring. So that way they can not only continue their programming in a virtual world, but then also to fill the gaps that their families and communities have when it comes down to the bare essentials, in this case, food or sanitation packets. In the bottom right, Volunteer Odyssey, they aim to develop a pathway to volunteering that enriches the lives and communities. Their diverse makeup of partners are advancing the community of Memphis by pulling together thousands to address the community needs, especially during COVID. And very briefly, City of Austin wants to identify gaps in the community. They want to serve the homeless. They even have gaps related to how businesses, nonprofits, and citizens want to come together to fill that void. So how does the city itself provide a platform or even a location for different various folks and verticals to see all the needs so that way they could come together and collaborate. Blazer Kitchen, they want to intake the food, but then also disseminate to those that are in need of the food. So that way they could decrease the food deserts that exist with their kitchen. UT Tennessee Health Science Center, they want to activate the community of employee, faculty, medical staff to help with COVID testing and analysis in their local community so they can save lives. Muncie School District, they want to activate families in the community to help fill the gaps of the school district. The point of this exercise really is to mention the intentionality of them answering the question why, and to really determine what goals they all want to accomplish, and really to guide them in terms of coordinating, tracking, and continuing refining their work. To move forward on any goal or objective, organizations and movements must have a baseline when it comes down to collecting and tracking data to affirm their goals and ideas. Specifically, we'll need a framework to ensure we're moving the needle and objectively understanding how to better be neighbors to the communities we serve. So the most important piece is really developing this data framework, and ensures that you're gathering data with intention. The process of developing or deciding upon a framework for an organization or institution really demands that you reflect on your goals, your current outcomes, and potential challenges of your work. And this can impact your employees, your business, and community. In this way, frameworks are an essential facet of turning your data into action and its impact to all constituents. So the culmination of all of what I'm trying to communicate here is really learnings from all the organizations that we worked with, from large and small nonprofits that are local and national, to businesses that are state-based, US-based, and international, to cities and municipalities that really feed from all of these constituents and affiliations. The framework here is designed by our community to really emphasize 5 bullet points, 5 pillars specifically. The first one is strategic internal efficacy. How can we use data within our own business and our own departments and our own institution to derive and tell a story that demonstrates that level of engagement of employees, right? How do we support that strategic plan with demonstrated and measurable impacts? I'll go into each in depth very soon, but I just want to at least call this one out. The second one is strategic external efficacy. How do we communicate data through reporting and more? And how do we use it to promote certain websites and social media? How do we actually generate the reports? We'll talk about that in a bit. And then there's the corporate engagement side of it, where really there's lots of different various angles I could have taken this, but I'm going to focus on just 2, and that's employee engagement, how employees connect with these experiences, and then leadership engagement. How do we also think of management, investors that are keen to understanding what and how their business outcomes really can impact the community at large. And then the fourth is community partner feedback loop, in which we encourage businesses to share data back to partners to really augment their own programmatic findings. How does data that come from partners really inform decisions made from the business and vice versa? And then the fifth is, how do community goals and collective impact, in which we examine, really help us listen and be better advocates and collaborators for the bigger, broader community? In this case, it could be community foundations that have certain goals. How can the business and corporation align themselves to those different various needs? Right? Now, these pillars aren't just made up out of nowhere. They were created and structured by a number of different existing frameworks. I happen to just distill that into 5 different various pillars. Some that you might be familiar with, from the Carnegie Foundation all the way to the TCFD task force on climate-related financial disclosures. There's a number of different various frameworks that currently exist to help businesses really think of different various mechanisms to track, but then also to tell their story. And I think there's probably 5 predominant popular ones. If you guys are interested, happy to connect with me. I could share you guys direct links to all of these different various frameworks. But there are a bunch, so happy to share them via email or via that QR code to the right. Now, let's dig into strategic internal efficacy. The first of these is really gathering data to track and analyze strategic internal efficacy. And this can be non-revenue generating goals, all the way to revenue generating goals. I think in terms of community engagement, I think a lot of the lens has always been centered around non-revenue generating goals. And so how do these help identify goals that we can really address for the community? How can the possible gaps and areas of concerns that exist be identified? How can the metrics that are normally siloed from different departments, different various sites and locations be somehow pulled together for the business as a whole? For some examples of what data might be used for strategic internal efficacy, we're going to try to talk about how to operationalize this data. So I'm going to share a few ideas and examples. So one is obviously annual reports. And I think everyone in the CSR side of it, it's a given that we have to have some type of annual report or dashboard to share our story and talk about how we can better strategize and communicate throughout the different various levels that we work with in our institution. So many instances, we want to use the data to tell that story, but then we also have to do it in a way where there's cadence. So sometimes doing it in an annual way can be helpful, but we should also think about quarterly. We should also think about having some type of interactive dashboard that is accessible to everyone on a monthly basis. So that way they themselves can have access to this. We should also make sure that a lot of this work is aligned towards some type of measurable impact. We also have to make sure that we advocate and justify why we even exist in terms of a budget or why we're trying to increase our staffing levels. Maybe it's because we want to increase the existing momentum to encompass more and more employees to actually be a part of this work. Maybe we'll want to also help facilitate cross-site location, department, or campus collaboration. Maybe sometimes it's also about data aggregation across the campus as a whole. The point is, data on our business community, that our data from our business community needs to be quantifiable and needs to help accomplish specific business strategic goals and tactics, as well as to identify how other units and departments are actually making this impact. And we shouldn't just limit it to just employees. How does this also be captured so that way management leadership can also be considered? How can this also be considered for affinity groups or employee resource groups? Because when all of this gets aggregated, we could then actually review our budgets and actually try to make further investments so that way it doesn't negatively impact the community at large that we're serving. Right? In addition, I think a lot of businesses are shifting towards OKRs. So those that aren't familiar with OKRs, basically it's a framework to really help with goal setting. And it's used by individuals, teams, and organizations like ours to really define measurable goals and track outcomes. I think what's unique about OKRs when it comes down to community engagement is how do we actually provide a level of transparency so that way everyone in the whole organization can actually see how we're improving and moving the needle. And so I think what's interesting is this is one example in regards to what we're doing from an OKR standpoint to improve the employee experience. I'm going to read it to you so that way you guys could have a better understanding of it. So one of the goals is to engage in board service, scholarship, research, and experiential learning activities to really prepare future leaders and scholars and global citizens. So we want to do everything we can by providing experiences that are either from a pro bono opportunity to a hackathon to an opportunity to volunteer and be a board member. So that way we could really provide leadership development opportunities for every employee. We really want to also ensure that because a new employee joins, it's the perfect opportunity to onboard and also encourage them to think of what that may look like when it comes down to engaging with the community. And that could be during onboarding process, we should probably encourage them to think of the different various ways they could leverage their time and the benefit of volunteering to grow their specific skills. And this is really important from a retention and belonging standpoint. And then the last one is really nurturing and promoting mental, physical, and social well-being among employees, right? So this is something that we're doing within our company, and we're actually on an ongoing basis improve this so that way our whole company can actually take this into consideration. The second goal is really, how do we become a national leader in advancing quality of life, economic development, sustainable and equity through meaningful engagement in discovery, philanthropy, and service with partners and throughout the nation or world. We work with a number of different partners, and JB Hunt, among Genentech, they have OKRs related to this. So a lot of this language is actually very similar to what our partners are doing. And so I'm not going to read all of this, but I do want to essentially emphasize that OKRs, normally meant for business objectives, can actually be applied if you consider the community's voice be a part of these OKRs and aligning that to your whole company itself. And now the second pillar is strategic external efficacy. And this is more of, how do we allow this framework to deliver reports and reviews that offer clear, actionable narratives featuring both quantitative and qualitative data. Having this data really will help you operationalize the data for strategic external efficacy. So probably the most important piece is knowing that for a lot of different various organizations and companies, awards have some type of impetus toward encouraging people to do this work. No incentive is a disincentive. So having awards help drive more folks to actually do this work. And I think it's equally even more important when you actually get the award, because it definitely helps elevate and raises the profile of the business and its mission and its impact in the region beyond. So having this data to tell a more compelling story is essential in the data-driven world. You know, in order to really connect and understand the quantitative and qualitative data, you're able to actually take that next step of really real transformation inside your organization. In most instances, our community prepares annual reports for leadership, and it shows quantifiable impact for the activities and events, but really it's more for digging deep into the data to actually determine if employee professional growth is being met, our business outcomes being met, our community building opportunities being met. This really builds trust with leadership and community, and in turn encourages other affiliates to align and support this work at scale. And then the third pillar is corporate engagement. How does the role of leadership in encouraging and activating employee engagement experiences really lead to positive business outcomes and community goals? This might include HR benefits, internal competitions amongst different various departments, DEI-related resource groups, which I'll share with you in a bit, workshops, be it for leadership development or mentorship. All of these are very important mechanisms to help with encouraging a sustained movement for pulling in community partners into the fold. So a good example would be JB Hunt. So JB Hunt, and I referenced them a couple of times, they have multiple different avenues for employees to engage. I think this is actually a little bit blurry, but you'll see different various organizations, from a women organization where they're trying to encourage women leaders inside the organization to mentor and support each other. The idea behind providing this avenue is really for employees to have different various affinities and avenues for them to network and build community within the whole organization. So one of the questions that we should really be always asking is, how do we continue providing more opportunities for employees to be engaged within the business? But then how do we also use these opportunities for them to build affinities and then take that next step where those affinities can also engage with the community, right? So how do you not only build community within the organization, but how do you actually have these organizations and groups also invest in different various community initiatives outside of the business? So how do you also have those conversations so that way you can actually determine professional outcomes with these experiences? How do you also leverage the power of reflection? How do you encourage employees to really stop and think about the different various experiences, the different various groups that they're aligning themselves to? Because on occasions, cognitive dissonance can actually be a very powerful learning and leadership development experience. So most important piece is ensuring that HR management could also work with employees to create these affinity groups and employee resource groups to really appeal to the overall company. And by leveraging these avenues, you could actually really build that foundation to help scale your efforts. Now, let's not forget that sometimes when you encourage employees to do this work, it's great, but what about leadership? What about management? I think it probably doesn't need to be said, but if leadership and management doesn't do this work, it's really hard to actually get buy-in for everyone else. So some of the questions that should be asked is, how do we engage management and leadership in this role and work? How do we incentivize and encourage them to make this a competition, or make this be an opportunity to bond and build team relationships? How do we use this as an opportunity to actually create a sense of belonging by individuals inside a team to invest time and energy working with a community partner outside of work, right? So how do we use this as an opportunity to provide leadership and management the opportunity to really take a step back and be a part with the employees and really encourage them to be involved in all angles, right? So one last point is, I think most instances we use the power of data to really help inform leadership and management how well these things are going. I think when they themselves are part of it, it helps amplify it, as in, it's great to see those reports. It's great to see that this is working. It's even more great if they themselves are experiencing it. Okay, and now the community partner feedback loop. Beyond the business and the institution itself, data can be used for community partner feedback loops. So a lot of instances, sometimes with corporate philanthropy, you do a lot of amazing things, but we're unable to actually circle back and actually provide deep, meaningful feedback loops to the community partner. Sometimes when we volunteer, we don't necessarily share those stories and experiences that of our employees back to the community partner, and vice versa. How can there be this feedback loop where community partners not only are able to feel as a teammate, but also be able to feed back data, that way that you can inform how well you're doing your work to the community, right? So it's this reciprocity, this reciprocal circle of data. How do you facilitate that? Now, I think it's true that a lot of different various organizations run surveys, and that's great. But what if there was an opportunity where community partners are actually part of that experience? What if there was an opportunity where every single experience, be it an opportunity to donate, be it an opportunity to volunteer, that there's a feedback loop where employees are able to actually share their experiences? Now, it's always interesting because when we're working with different various businesses and community partners, a lot of it is always opt-in, but it's always interesting to see, be it long form or short form, what people are learning. And from a technical front, a lot of this becomes stories that they could use for their own reporting and storytelling, for their own grant making, right? So I think part of the idea behind this is, how do we provide data, real data, that's helpful for the partners to also improve? If we're the business and we're the partner and we're actually working deeply with the partner, how do we ensure that there's this connection and a way for us to share data to help each other? How is there also a time for us to really assess and really deeply reflect on these experiences and the inputs that we're getting? And then how do we ensure that all of this insight can actually help not only the employee, but the business and the community? And the last is, ensuring that we have a data framework that must incorporate the broader community goals and impact. Businesses must define these goals, but in many instances, I think it's short-sighted if businesses jumps to the conclusions based on my personal experience, as I said at the very beginning. So how can we be a part of that conversation? How does the community foundation or the organizations, be it individual nonprofit or a network of organizations, share these goals so that way business can find a way to insert itself as an ally or as a collaborator, right? And in any case, data should be tracked so that way it's most effectively helping meet these goals, and so that way that there's reciprocity that's being created. Now, this example is really just to show you that during the Texas winter storm, everything shut down. And so there's this one opportunity where a couple of businesses came together along with us to fundraise for the children that were impacted not only from a food standpoint, but impacted from a water access issue. So part of this example is really to share that in many instances, yes, it could be the business that's identifying these goals and initiatives, but really the community is actually speaking out loud and crying for help. It's more of us needing to listen and identify where we can actually best align our skills and strengths to help fill that void. So in order to be a strong neighbor and ally, we have to really identify community goals. So we should examine to what extent our work is really meeting the broader community goals as defined by community members, foundations, and nonprofits. And we should really track our engagement in key focus areas. In this case, it could be early literacy, could be bridging the digital divide, could be food deserts, as I mentioned previously, could be because everything shut down. How do we make sure that we just ensure that people are warm and have access to water, as I mentioned about the Texas winter storm. So if you guys are ever interested in that story, that was chaotic for all of us in Austin, Texas. But really the collective impact is a key area of interest in the field of civic and community engagement, and more work really needs to be done to really appropriately measure and have the tools to quantify the impact. But we could really use the data to see if we're actually moving the needle on employees, businesses, working in partnership with the community stakeholders. Cross-sector collaboration is super important, and we must figure out how we can actually focus on it and attend to this, so that way social change is possible. So the key takeaway from all of this work that I'm sharing here is, just because you have the data doesn't mean you have a story or an impact. You have to use the data to tell a story. You have to tell a compelling story through the data and put the data plus the story in the hands of the leaders. In this case, could be the business, but then also the community. So you have to manage up and communicate impact. Lastly, I'm probably not going to spend that much time talking about it. I think it's a given that we must have some way of counting those beans. In many instances, those beans can be hours of volunteer hours. It could be payroll distributions. It could be a number of different various mechanisms. But I think the most important piece is you'll need to ensure and aggregate the data by associating with certain initiatives. Because by doing one level up, by essentially ensuring that you have a system that allows you to tag, allows you to automate the process of aggregating certain information, be it, let's just say, sustainable development goals or Community Reinvestment Act related initiatives, you must have a way to track and scale this appropriately. Because otherwise the job would be really focused on like doing the work of just counting the beans. Whereas you take it one level up, it's all about how do you categorize and how do you analyze and understand this data in a deeper way, right? So a lot of instances is also, on top of counting the beans, it's also understanding that there's a lot of existing system of record of data that exist, a lot of systems and databases that exist that have all this data that you might need, right? Sometimes you need a system like a GivePulse to help integrate with all these different systems and pull, and so that way you could tell the story. But a lot of instances is also understanding that the data might actually be right under your nose. The data might actually already exist on a lot of these different various systems. So data integration is of utmost importance, because nowadays with multiple different systems, it's all about speaking to each other. It's all about ensuring that there's seamless connection with all of the different various systems. And then on top of it, also synchronizing the data. So that way you, the end user and administrator, have full capacity to actually, one, pull those reports, but then also have a full picture of all the activities and engagement, and then have the opportunity and the room and time to say, hey, what about us connecting it to employee performance? What about us connecting it to business outcomes? What about us connecting it to business OKRs, right? So having that understanding is really important. So operationalizing data through goals and initiatives in tandem with partners is also a really critical piece. How do you also leverage a system that enables partners to be a part of this? So that way that feedback loop, as I kind of discussed, can be addressed. So of course, making sure to engage in ways to help partners and your community is, in doing so, really, truly making an impact. Now, once again, these 5 pillars help one's programming to scale, to really ensure business buy-in and investment. It helps increase employee engagement and sustain community impact. By focusing on these pillars, you can really prime any corporate social responsibility program and initiative to scale and success. Most importantly, it creates that foundation to ensure that the data, 2 stories of impact on employees, business, and community can really be created in a way that will foster reciprocity, growth, and belonging. So I'm gonna pause right there and then see if there's any questions. And that is a wrap.
Yes, great. Thanks, George. I think we only have time for one question. We do have more in the chat, but I would encourage you all to reach out to George. He's got his contact information there for additional follow-up. But just as a close, I wonder if you could give us an answer to one of the questions that came through, which is, how do we better engage leadership so they're experiencing the work and not just seeing the data? Or how do you best use the data to get them engaged?
Yeah, I think it's a chicken and egg situation, because I think we always have leaders that always say, have big talk, but they don't actually necessarily do it themselves. So if there's an opportunity for them, for just even a conversation with leaders to actually determine what types of board service they're currently in, or what types of causes that they're actually deeply care about, I think that's an opportunity for you to ensure that those opportunities exist. Because I think that's actually one strategy. One strategy is really having that conversation with leadership to make sure that those experiences really align towards what they're interested in. So that way they're there, and when they're there, they're going to bring their team in, right? Mm-hmm. So I think we always want to care about what our employees want, but really having that opportunity to sit down with leadership and management and figuring out what they want helps really move that needle even further, I think.
Yeah, that's a great point. Well, George, thank you so much for your time today. As a reminder, we will be sending out the recording and additional resources. You can snap that QR code if you'd like to get directly to GivePulse. I want to thank everybody for being on the session with us today and your good questions and your good engagement. And George, thank you. And thanks to GivePulse for your continued support of ACCP. We're glad to have you as part of the CSR Marketplace Live.
Cool. Thank you again.
Great. We did put a link to a survey in the chat. So if you have a minute to go ahead and take that, that's helpful for all of us. And we appreciate your feedback as we close out the session. So thank you again and have a great afternoon, everyone. Thanks, George.
Thanks. Bye.